Hi everyone. Today we're going to go over a demonstration of how to compose a works cited page and entries for it. Yes, this video will probably be a little long, and yes, it will be repetitive, and yeah, it will probably be boring. But I've assigned material to study how to do MLA documentation in classes. And I found that students don't learn how to do MLA documentation from reading the materials. I don't know whether they're just not reading them or they don't understand how to copy formats exactly. Not really sure what the situation is. So to make sure that you know how to format bibliographies and bibliography entries, you're going to watch this video. Now, I always recommend that you complete a works cited page for your paper before you start writing the draft. Technically, it's a working works cited page because you may find that you don't use all the sources that you plan to use before you drafted your paper. So you may end up having to delete some sources because they're not used in your paper. But as we'll see when we study the video on how to do in-text citations, in-text citations are based on the first item in the works cited entry. Well, you can't know what the first item in the works cited entry is unless you've done the works cited entry, right? So it's best to always do a works cited page before you begin drafting your paper so that you can do your in-text citations correctly. When you go to do your works cited page, you will need, obviously, a blank Word document. You will need to have all of your sources gathered around you, whether that's in physical stacks or somewhere on the computer or as a series of links on your web browser. You will also need, of course, some place to look up how to do the formatting. Now, composition textbooks include that information, but most people don't hang on to their composition textbooks after they finish the course. A really good way to find how to format bibliography entries is by using the Purdue Owl. There are a couple of reasons that I recommend the Purdue Owl for doing bibliographies. For one thing, it's always accurate and it's always up to date. But something that I think is even better is that anyone can use this site for free for the rest of their lives. So if you learn how to do documentation using the Purdue Owl, well, that's going to be a resource that you can always use. So you don't have to learn to work with several different books or sites or so forth. But as long as you know that you're working with a good, accurate resource that provides information on how to format bibliography entries, you're okay. I just think the Purdue Owl is best. Now, we've opened our Word document. Microsoft Word is currently available through cloud-based programs. And cloud-based programs have a tendency to change on whim, sometimes in the middle of the night, with no warning. The version of Word that is usable on the day that I'm making this video doesn't show top and bottom margins, even though I selected print layout for the view, and the margin should show. So to make sure that my margins are correct, I'll go to Format, Document, and check to make sure that I do have 1-inch margins on the top and bottom and at least 1 inch to 1.25 inches on the left and right, which is fine. Make sure that your paper is formatted to be in Times New Roman, 12 point. chances are good that the default in your computer is Calibri, and I think it's 11 point. That's not correct. Everything in MLA is Times New Roman 12 point, so make sure that you do your Works Cited page in Times New Roman 12 point. We also know that we have to double space the page. And by the way, if these basic formatting techniques are confusing to you, please go back and restudy the video on how to set up MLA and Microsoft Word that was assigned very early in the semester. That way I won't have to bore everybody by explaining it again. And then you center your text and you type works, and that's W-O-R-K-S. There's an S on the end of it because you have more than one source. It's a plural noun. Plural nouns end in S. And then it's cited, C-I-T-E-D, not S-I-T-E-D. That's a different word. So it's W-O-R-K-S, capital C-I-T-E-D. And just like with the title of the paper, you don't underline it, you don't put it in italics, you don't make it bold, you don't increase it to 72 points, you don't put flashing lights or dancing clowns around it, you just type it. Then you hit the return key one time. Don't insert any extra lines. And you take it back to a line left. Now, Works Cited pages use hanging indents. Hanging indents are exactly the opposite of the way the paragraphs are formatted in your paper. And this is why I encourage people to learn to use the ruler. Because to format hanging indents, remember that ruler at the top of Microsoft Word and the two arrows on the left? Well, you point to the one on the bottom, hold down the Shift key, and drag it to 1/2 inch. And what that will do is it will make the first line of each entry flush against the left margin, and each additional line of that entry will be indented 1/2 inch. That's what you want in MLA style. Don't try to do this by hand because it will make a real mess. Believe me, I used to try it. It doesn't work. Do it this way. Believe me, it will be a whole lot easier and save you a whole lot of stress. Now, that basically sets the page up. So we're ready to begin comprising our Works Cited entries. Now, the way I've collected my sources for the purpose of this video, because it wouldn't do a whole lot of good to stack them up on the sofa next to me since you can't see the sofa, right? Is I put them all in a folder. And I've kind of put them in a particular order, although not really. Now, one of the sources that I'm considering using for my paper is a book. If I weren't making a video, I would just look in the book for the information. But again, you guys couldn't see the book, so that wouldn't be very useful. So instead, I've taken notes on it. And I note that the source that I took from a book is actually a chapter in an anthology. So we need to go to whatever source we're using to look up how to do our entries. And for this class, and for this video, that's the Purdue Owl. So we go to the Purdue Owl and we look for information on how to do MLA Works Cited page books. We click on that. Now, you do need to go in and study basic information on basic formatting. But I'm assuming you can read, so I'm not going to take up your time in this video going over that. The book that we're working with is a work from an anthology, which is right here, a work in an anthology, reference, or collection. If you don't know what an anthology is, I'm sure your computer has a dictionary. Okay, so that's how we're going to format it. We'll move this down so that we can see the format entry, but it isn't blocking the information that we need to do the entry. Now, exactly how you want to work with it is up to you and your personal preference. On the Purdue Owl, there is always a kind of generic, descriptive entry that tells you what comes first and what comes second. You can work with that, or you can work with examples. So whichever way works best for you is great. And we see the first thing that we need is the author's name. And the author's name, that would be the author of the chapter in the anthology. Because an anthology is a collection of works, and each work is written by a different author, and each work has its own title. So basically, it's as if it's a chapter title, but there's also a separate author. So the author of the work from the anthology that I read, his name is Jureidini, comma. His first name is John and is Jon, and since he includes a middle initial, we will also include it. Some authors use their middle initial and some don't. Okay, and then we go and we see what comes next. And what comes next is the title of the specific work that we used in the anthology, or title of essay, as the Purdue Owl calls it. And we see, first of all, we notice that there's a period at the end of the author's name. It's important to include that. And then we see that the title of the essay or article from the anthology is enclosed in quotation marks, and that there is a period inside the closed quotation marks. So now we know how to format it. So we can have open quotation marks, now we see that apparently in the book, the title of the work only capitalized the first letter. Some publications adopt that as their style, but that doesn't mean that's what you do in your bibliography. If we look at the examples on the Purdue Owl, we see that every important word in the title is capitalized. So we will go ahead and use that style. And then we notice that there is a period at the end of the title, and then close quotation marks. And then there's a space. An MLA always only has one space, not 2 or 3 or 4. It's only one space between words, between the ends of sentences, between parts of the works cited entry, one space. Okay, and then we see that the next thing is the title of the collection. In other words, the name of the book, the anthology that this essay was in. And the name of the book is just Antidepressants. And we see by looking at our MLA style guide that the title of the book needs to be in italics. So we go up and we choose to italicize the type, and we type in the title. Now we go back to our entry and we see that the title should be followed by a comma. The comma isn't italicized. So we go back to Word. We click on the I to make sure that it's not italicized, and then we put in a comma. Now, the next thing we need to know is who edited it, because anthologies always have an editor as well as the person who wrote the individual chapters. In this case, I made a note that the editor is Catherine Reed Dunbar. So we type in and we look to make sure that, yes, it's first name first and last name last for the editors. So we type in edited by and then the editor's name. And we see that the editor's name is followed by a comma. So we add a comma. And then we see that the next thing we need is the name of the publisher. And in this case, we see that the publisher was Greenhaven Press, so we add that. And we see that after the publisher, we have a comma. And then we need the year, which is 2006. Oh, and then we need the comma, and then PP, period. And the pages that in the book that this particular chapter takes up. And I'm sorry, I forgot to write those down. But it's 123 through 127. So it's like that. And then we end it with a period. So that is how we would do that entry. Having fun yet? Don't you wish you'd learned this when you studied it in the book? I wish you had. Okay. Next, we pull up an article that we downloaded from a database in the library. Notice that when you download an article from a library database, always download it in PDF format. Because PDF format means that what you're basically getting is an exact duplication of what appeared in the original print publication. So that means, for example, that you're going to get tables that you need, and they will be formatted correctly. Okay? If there are graphics, those will also appear, and more importantly, there are page numbers in PDF documents. And as you'll see, when we go to do the in-text citations, you have to have the page numbers. Okay, so this is the next article we're going to do, and as I said, this is an article that I downloaded from a library database, and I made a note for myself when I saved it that I downloaded it from ProQuest, which is my abbreviation for ProQuest Central. So I know which database I downloaded it from. You need that information for the works cited entry. Okay, so here's our article. Now, we have to go to a different section of the MLA Purdue site to look that up. Because since we downloaded it from the web, that would be an electronic source. And specifically, it's a work downloaded from a database. So we go down and we find, here we go, an article from an online database or other electronic subscription service. Anytime that you download something from the CSN library, you're downloading it from a database, and this is the format that you need to use to do the works cited entry. Okay. And we see that the first thing we need, again, is the author's name. That if we have more than one author, the first author would be last name first, and then first name. But after that, the author would be first name first. Okay, so we've got to keep that in mind. Let's take a look at, we have 3 authors. Now, how do we do a citation if we have 3 authors? Well, different resources that will provide the information on how to do works cited entries will place this information in different places. Often it's placed under the information for books, and that's where it is in the Purdue Owl. So we'll go back to the books page again, and we'll look for what to do if we had 3 authors. More than one author. Aha! If there are 3 or more authors, list only the first author followed by the phrase et al. Okay, so we know that if we have 3 or more authors, we're going to use et al. Keeping that in mind, we will go back to our entry for online databases. And we've got 3 authors. And as we've seen, we want last name first. Now, these authors only provide their first initial, and that's fine. Since that's all they give us, that's all you're going to use. And it's Henry, comma, A, E-T-A-L, period. We go back to check to see what kind of punctuation we need after the authors, and it happens to be a period. And as it happens, there's always a period at the end of et al, so that's already there. The next thing we need is the title of the article. And again, all important words are capitalized, and the title of the article is enclosed in quotation marks, and there's a period inside the quotation marks at the end of the article. So we bring our source over so that we can see it. We have quotation marks, and then we type in our article, remembering to capitalize all the important words. And just to make sure we're doing it right, we finished our title, we go back, and yes, there's a period at the end of the title and then the quotation marks. It's always best to double check because you always want to make sure you do it correctly. Because yes, it's very nitpicky. Very, very nitpicky. And some professors will take off points if you use a comma instead of a period. If you use capital letters instead of italics, they'll really kind of ding you for that. So you really need to know how to do these correctly for other courses, as well as for this one. So after the title of the article, we need the title of the journal that it came from, or magazine that it came from, or newspaper that it came from. It kind of depends on the source. This particular source, if I remember correctly, is from an academic journal. Right. So we see that the title of the magazine or the journal or the newspaper is italicized and is followed by a comma. So back to our source and our Word document. We italicize the type, and we look for the journal title. And the journal title is usually right at the top of the journal. If you have problems figuring out the title of a journal or what's what, you can always go back to the site that you downloaded it from, because it will provide that information for you. If you're familiar enough with how the journal is set up, you won't necessarily need to do that. Or if you take notes, you won't need to do that. Otherwise, yes, you might. And the name of this journal is Molecular Psychiatry. And we'll go double check. It needs a comma after it, and the comma shouldn't be italicized. So we go up and we turn off the italics and insert a comma. The next thing we need is the abbreviation VOL period and the volume number. So we go back to our article, and the volume number is 17. And again, if you can't tell that by looking at the source itself, go back to the site you downloaded it from and look it up, because it will be there. So that's VOL period 17. The next thing we need is the issue number. So we go and we look at our journal. Now, not all publications have issue numbers. Newspapers don't have issue numbers. Many academic journals also don't have issue numbers. So if there is no issue number, obviously you're not going to include it. But we do need our comma after volume because there would also be one after the issue if there were an issue number, which there isn't. And then it wants the date of publication. Now, that's the day, then the month or abbreviation of the month, and then the year. But again, sometimes academic journal articles don't provide you with the day and the month that they're published. They simply are not published in that regular schedule. What it does tell us, though, is that it was 2012 when this article was published. So we will put in the year. After that, we need the page number. Well, after that, actually, we need a comma after the year. And then we need PP period and the page numbers for the article. See, that's why you need PDFs. And the page numbers are, well, this is 1187, so this is 1186. And if we scroll to the bottom of the article, we find out that it's 1193. Now, how much of that should I include? Well, let's see what we can. Well, now here's an example that shows that if the pages are 173 to 196, we just put 173-96. So the same thing would be true for something that is of this length as well. So we will put in 1186-93. And what comes after the page numbers? A period. And then we need the name of the database. And the database name has to be italicized. So we click italics. And the name of the database, as I noted at the top of the article, is ProQuest, or which is my abbreviation for ProQuest Central. And after that, there's a comma, which again we deselect italics, insert the comma. Then after that, there is something that is either a DOI or a URL. Now, a DOI is like a permanent web address, and more sites are going to that. If a DOI is available, use that. But often it isn't. So what you can use that works just as well is to go to the site that you downloaded the work from, highlight the URL in the address bar, copy it, and paste it. But you also have to work with the formatting of URLs. Because for one thing, and we'll see this most likely in other examples, sometimes you need to break these lines up, and we'll see how that works. And as you can see, once you hit the return key after you enter the URL, it turns into a link. You don't want it to be a link. So you have to highlight the link. And then in Microsoft Word, you go to Insert, find Hyperlink, click on Remove Link, and that should take care of it. Okay. And then once again, We go back to check our citation, and we see that after the DOI or URL, we have a period. That finishes our second citation. So we're ready for the next one. As you can see, Microsoft Word does not always work the way it's supposed to. Sometimes you have to do things several times to get them to work, but it looks like it's okay now. Okay, so that takes care of the works cited entry for that article. We're ready for the next one. Now, this is an article that was downloaded from a library database called Issues and Controversies. Issues and Controversies is a database that provides articles from a pros and cons standpoint. So, for example, if there is any kind of an issue where some people support it and some people are opposed to it, you might be able to find an article on Issues and Controversies. And whether you are discussing both the pros and the cons, or just the cons, or just the pros, or anything along those lines, Issues and Controversies articles can be very handy. For one thing, they always begin with a box that summarizes what supporters state, and then another box that summarizes what opponents state. There is always an introduction that explains the basic issue, and sometimes there are also statements within that introduction that also present points that the supporters would make or points that the opponents would make. There's usually, this section also usually includes history of the issue. There's some good background and on a number of different aspects of the issue. And then there's always a section specifically dedicated to what the supporters say, and another section specifically dedicated to what the opponents say. So Issues and Controversies articles can come in very handy if you're writing about the advantages and disadvantages, or advantages or disadvantages of a particular situation, what the supporters say and what the opponents say about a controversial issue, what the pros are, what the cons are. If you're doing anything that can be considered like that, Issues and Controversies might be a good database to look into. But this is a database that puts together information that is not published in magazines, newspapers, or in any print form. It's simply published on the database itself. And that means that, for one thing, even in PDF, since these are websites and that's all they are, there's no publication, there won't be any page numbers in Issues and Controversies articles. Another thing it means is that the formatting is going to have to be played with a little bit, because we're not going to have some of the information that we use in other works cited entries for articles from a database. So let's move our article down, because we've seen before that that works best. Don't need this thing right now, but we need this. Now, this is still an article from a database, but like I said, it's a little bit different. We remember, or we can tell by looking at it, that the first thing we need is the author's name. So we look at the top and the bottom. And it really wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea to go to Issues and Controversies site where you downloaded the article and double check. But I can tell you that Issues and Controversies articles never have an author. I've been working with these for a long time, so I already knew that, but I wanted to show you how to figure it out. Okay? So there's no author. That means that we start with the title of the article itself, okay? And we put it in quotation marks. So we begin with quotation marks. And we type in our title. One thing that I want to make a note of is this Issues and Controversies article has what would normally be considered a title and a subtitle. The title is Antidepressant Drugs, and the subtitle is Are Antidepressant Drugs Safe for Young Patients? Now, Issues and Controversies is set up so that there is a colon in between the title and the subtitle. Sometimes, for example, if you're working with a book, the title and the subtitle are simply differentiated on the book cover by using different type size. But when you do works cited entries, the way you handle subtitles is you always have the main title first, then a colon, and then the subtitle. Issues and Controversies already uses a colon, but not every source you'll work with will. Now, go back and check, and there's normally a period at the end of the title. But since this title ends in a question mark, we don't need another period. The question mark is fine. And we see that that our title ends with quotation marks. Okay. Now, normally, the next thing that you would have would be information about the newspaper, magazine, or journal that the article originally appeared in. That would be this information right here. But Issues and Controversies articles don't ever appear in a newspaper, magazine, or journal, so we don't need that information at all. The next thing we need is the title of the database, and that would be italicized. Okay. And the actual formal title of the Issues and Controversies database, as we see when we look at this, is, and like we said, it's italicized, so let's click our italics, Facts on File. And that's actually a header with a subheader. Issues and Controversies. Now, with some of these databases, including this one, there's some question as to exactly what is considered the title of the database and exactly how to format it. When you have a question like that, always go to the professor that you're writing the paper for and ask that professor how he or she wants it formatted. Because different professors, 99.99% of the time, these documentation questions are pretty much open and shut. There's one way to do it, you do it that way, and if you don't do it that way, well, it's wrong. But every now and then you'll run into a situation when it's not 100% clear exactly what you should do. And in a case like that, always go to the person who's grading the paper and ask them how they want you to do it. Because after all, if you email me and ask me how to set something up, and I send you back advice, and you follow my advice, well, of course I'm going to count it right. I mean, it can't very well count something wrong if you did it the way I told you to, right? So you should always, if you have a question like that, always go to the professor that teaches the class, that assigned the paper, and ask for that professor's advice. Okay, so after our database name, we have a comma, And again, that's not italicized. And then we need the URL. And I already called all of these up because it's easier, and also I didn't want you guys to have to wait for these pages to load. So it didn't highlight. It usually does. We highlight the URL if it isn't automatically highlighted. Copy it. And paste it. Now here's an example of a time when you need to add some spaces because you don't want this big empty white space here. So you have to kind of eyeball it and guess where you need to add a space. And when you have a URL that's all a string of characters that basically is all formatted as one word, if you add a space, it's going to do a line break for you. Now that might not be perfect, but it looks a heck of a lot better than what we had before, and it's good enough. But again, part of it is formatted as a link, and we don't want that, so we go to Insert, Hyperlink, Remove Link. Well, what do you know, it worked that time. And then we go back to our... I've forgotten what I'd done here. To our example from the Purdue Owl, and we see that after the URL comes a period. So that's another entry finished. And for now, we're done with that source. Bored yet? Bet you wish you'd studied the material in the textbook, huh? But this should help. And believe me, knowing how to do this stuff can really make a lot of difference in your academic future because some professors are really, really picky about this stuff. If they weren't, if I didn't think this was really important, I wouldn't put you through all this, and to tell you the truth, I wouldn't spend all this time making video either. But this is really, really important, and if you guys don't learn it, you could run into real problems later on. So I want to do whatever I can to help you learn this, even if it does bore you to tears, okay? Because better you're bored today than you fail a class later on because you didn't use documentation correctly, right? Okay, so we go to our next source. This is a newspaper article downloaded from the library. And again, we see that it was also downloaded from ProQuest Central because I made a note of that when I saved the article. But even though it's a newspaper article, it's still an article from an online database, so we still use the same entry to figure out how to format it. Once again, we need the author's name first. Let's see if there is an author here. Because some newspapers articles, of course, don't have authors. In newspapers, those are called bylines, and not every writer for a newspaper gets a byline. And no, there's no author. So when we don't have an author, we begin with the title of the article, and that should be enclosed in quotation marks. The title of the article, as we have our quotation marks, and of course, article titles always have a period inside the quotation marks. After the title of the article is the title of the newspaper, magazine, or journal that the article was originally published in. So we go back to our article and we see that it appeared in New York Times. Okay. And we also notice that the title of the newspaper, magazine, or journal that the article was published in is italicized. So we select italics and we type in New York Times. Now, after the title of the newspaper, there should be a volume and issue number, but newspapers don't have volume and issue numbers. They do, however, have publication dates, very specific publication dates. This one happens to be September 16th, 2004. And we see that the way that is formatted is, first of all, I forgot, put in our comma. So the way that is formatted is the day is first, which is the 16th. After the day is the abbreviation for the month. And then comes the year. Okay. Then after the publication date, page numbers, and as you know, most newspapers are divided into sections like A, B, C, D, and then there are page numbers after that, and the page number for this article is A26, and just to make sure, it's PP period, A26. After the page numbers, there's a period. And then we have the name of our database, and that's in italics. It's ProQuest Central. And then after the name of the database, there's a comma that's not in italics. And then we have our URL. And once again, I've already called the article up so I could get the URL. Why are my URLs not highlighting? Normally they do as soon as you click on them. Oh well, that's easy to work around, isn't it? Just copy and paste it. And again, the spacing here, we have a big white space here, and we don't want that. So we kind of have to decide where it might work. And it's always best to insert your space after some form of punctuation, if there is one. Yeah, that's good enough. That's fairly even. And of course, we have to go in and highlight the part that is formatted as a link. Go to Insert, Hyperlink, move the link. That looks okay. We go back to our example, and we see that after the URL, or DOI, depending on what we have, is a period. Okay. The next source we're going to do is an actual page from a website, because I know that you will be using those in some of your papers for this class. The website that we're going to use, that was used in the sample paper, is this one. Okay. So this gets a little tricky if you keep switching back and forth between tabs on your browser. So when I'm doing a works cited entry for a web page, I go ahead and pull that browser window out so it's separate. That way, I can work with this particular site the same way that I worked with the articles that I had copies of. Okay, so we go to our Purdue site. And of course, a page from a website is also an electronic source. So we're on the right page because this is the page for electronic sources. But we need to look up how to do a page from a website. And here we go, a page for a website. Now, and here are two examples, one with an author and one without an author. So the first thing we have to check is to see if there's an author for this website. And lo and behold, there is. His name is Matt Miller. So we have an author. And as always, the last name is first and then the first name. And since there's only one author, that's all we need. So we type in Miller, comma, and double check the spelling, M-A-T-T. And we'll check the entry to make sure there's no changes, but no, there is a period right after the author's name, so that's what goes next. And then it says that you need an indication of the specific page or article, in other words, the title. And on this particular web page, it does have a specific title. And that title goes in quotation marks. So we go back to the page that we're using. Adjust this a little bit here so we can see it. We have our quotation marks and then the title. We double check, and yes, there is a period at the end of the title, whether there's an author or not, and then there's the close quotation marks. So we put in our period and our quotation marks. After the quotation marks is the name of the website, and the name of this website is Slate. Okay, we double check the formatting, and yes, the name of the website is in italics. Click that, and then we type in the name of the website. And after the name of the website, whether there's an author or whether there isn't, comes a comma, and we know that those commas aren't italicized. And then after the title is the date, if there is a date on the website. And for this one, there is. And as always in MLA, the date is formatted so that it's day, then month, then year. So for that, so in this case, it's 13, and of course June doesn't need to be abbreviated. We spell it out. I don't think there's a comma there, is there? No. And the year is 2016. You don't need the time. He goes a little bit farther than we need. Okay. Then after the date, the year is a comma. And then after the comma is the URL. And after the URL is a period. And when we hit the return key, of course, Microsoft Word formats it as a link. So we highlight it, we go to Insert, Hyperlink, Remove Link. And sometimes, as I've said, you have to do it a couple of times because Microsoft Word used to be a great program, and then they started messing with it and adding more and more garbage to it, and now the basics don't work anymore. Okay, that's how that one works. We have one more source to do, and that's this one. Okay. This is also an article that was downloaded from the library database. In fact, it was downloaded from ProQuest again. So we're going to be using the same citation format. And we begin with the author. Last name first for the first author. So let's see who our author is. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 authors. And we know if we have 3 or more authors, we use et al. And all we need is the first author's name listed. And always list authors' names in the order that they appear on the publication. Don't put them in alphabetical order or anything like that. Use the order that they're listed on the publication. Because, for example, what this list tells you is that Shauna Reinblatt probably did more work than the other people did on the article. And then Susan Dos Rios probably did the second most, and so forth. Believe me, I have honest-to-God known professors to get into physical fights over whose name is listed first on an article. It makes that much difference to these people, okay? So always do it that way. Okay, so the author is Reinblatt, Shauna, and she uses a middle initial, so we'll include it. And it's et al. And we go back and check, and the authors' names are always followed by a period, and of course et al. Already ends in a period, so our period is already there. The next thing we have is the title of the article. Gets really repetitious, huh? But if you watch this video and listen to me repeat this stuff often enough, maybe you'll do your works cited entries right. That would be a really nice change. Okay? So, we have a quotation mark. And then we have the title. This is a long one. See? I forgot to put my space in there. Okay. Tour. F-L-U-B-O-X-A-M-I-N-E. Okay. And actually, of course, we remembered this by now, but go and check. A period comes after the title, and then you have the closed quotation marks. After the title comes the title of the newspaper, magazine, or journal that the article was originally published in, and that's in italics. And our journal title name is right here. Oh, I will tell you, because obviously before I made this video, I actually went through and did a works cited page myself so that I knew exactly what was going to need to be done. As it happens, in on this particular page of this particular issue of this journal, they misspelled psychopharmacology. And when I was getting ready to do this video, I went back to the site that I downloaded the article from and double-checked the spelling of the actual journal title to make sure that this was a typo here, and it is. So that's why I'm spelling it differently than is spelled here. I've already gone in and researched the correct spelling. Okay. So it's in italics. I'm having problems typing today. I think it's an Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology. And we go back and check, and there's a comma after the title of the article, and it's not italicized. So we undo our italics, comma. After that, we need the volume number. Actually, after that, we need VOL, period. And then the volume number. The volume number is 19. And after the volume number, we need a comma. And then we need NO, period, for the issue number. And then we need the issue number, and the issue number is 2. And after the issue number, we need a comma. And after that, we need the date of publication. And this journal, again, doesn't provide any information about the month or the day that it was published. All they give us is the year, but that's all right because that's all we really have to have, since that's all they use. And then we have the page, and then we have a comma, and then we have PP for page number. And then we look, and now this journal was kind enough to actually tell us right on the front page what the page numbers are. You won't usually find that. Normally you have to look at the page number on the first page and the page number on the last page, but I don't think that's so much work that it'll kill you. So we put in 119 through 26. And after the page number is a period. And then we have the name of the database, and it needs to be italicized. And the name of the database, one last time, is ProQuest Central. And after the name of the database, we need a comma, and the comma is not in italics. So we deselect italics and put a comma. And then this journal article actually does have a DOI. So the way we format that is we type in DOI in lowercase and a colon. And then we have the DOI number. .10.89/CAP.2008.040. And after the URL, or in this case, the DOI number, is a period. Okay, so now we have all of our sources listed on our Works Cited page, but we're not done yet. Because the works cited page, the entries have to be in alphabetical order. But fortunately, once we have them typed out, Microsoft Word will actually help us with that. We highlight all of the works cited entries, not the words works cited, just works cited entries. We go to the icon on our document, and you'll see that it has a blue A at the top, a black C at the bottom on the left, a long black arrow going down to the right. And when you point to it, it says sort. And if you click on that, the first thing you have to do is make sure that it says sort by paragraphs, because there are other options. But most of the time in Word, and certainly in bibliographies, you want paragraph. And the type is definitely text, because we don't want it organized by any kind of numbers or dates. And we want it ascending, which means going from A to Z, not descending, which would be Z to A. So once we have that set up, we click OK. And it's pretty much alphabetized, but not really. Because, as you'll see, Microsoft Word reads quotation marks as the first character to be considered in alphabetizing, and that's not true. You want to actually alphabetize by the first letter of the first important word. And so what we end up here is, it looks like R comes before H, and we know the alphabet. That's not true. So we have to highlight this one, copy it, and it's R-I-S. R-I-S, of course, comes after R-E-I, so it actually goes at the bottom. And we paste it. And once we're sure that the whole thing is there, we go up and delete it. You also have to be careful, because Microsoft Word will alphabetize articles with, for example, if you had an article that was called "A Dog Can Run," it will alphabetize it under A. You don't consider A, an, or the in alphabetizing. You alphabetize by the first important word. So you may have to move some entries around when you sort it, but for the general overall sorting, Microsoft Word will do that for you automatically. Then, of course, you would want to look at it, look it over, and make sure that it at least looks pretty much like it should. For one thing, I can tell you flat out, there's almost no entry, and certainly there's no works cited entry that has anything to do with anything that has ever been published that doesn't have at least one item in it that's italicized. At least one, and often two. If it's from a database, a lot of times you'll have two sections of it that's italicized. So, one thing to make sure is to go through and make sure that there's something italicized in every one of your entries. Because if there isn't, well, that's a real good clue that something's wrong somewhere. They look overall pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and in my folder that I've entitled Anti-D Paper Stuff, I'm going to put works cited for Anti-D paper, because that's just what I'm calling the paper, in shorthand, that is. Save it. And my working works cited page is done. Now, like I said from the beginning, I knew that this was going to be a long video. I knew it was going to be very repetitious, and I knew that it would probably be pretty boring, and I'm really sorry about that. But if you're not picking this information up by studying the material in the textbook and the materials assigned, then I have to do something about it. And since students don't seem to be able to learn to do MLA citations by studying supplied materials, I need to demonstrate it. It's kind of silly because it's not rocket science. All you have to do is figure out what kind of entry you have, or what kind of source you have. If it's a book, an article from a print publication, or something from an electronic source, find that type of article either in your textbook or on the Purdue Owl or whatever resource you're using, and copy the formatting exactly. It's not tough. In fact, it's pretty simple. But since students seem to need help with it, I want to make sure I supply the help, because honest to God, I don't want you guys to run into a nitpicky professor who, for example, takes off a point for every character in a bibliography entry that is formatted incorrectly and not know how to do it because I didn't teach you how to do it. I've taught you how to do it. Whether you learn it or not, well, that's kind of up to you, but at least I'm giving you as much help as I can. I hope this video, as long and boring and repetitive as it is, did help you. And if you have any questions at all about how to do the works cited page, works cited entries, an entry for a source that you have, all you need to do is email me through Canvas. I want to help you any way I can. We'll get together soon and talk about how to do in-text citations for this paper, working with this works cited page. Until then, take a break, relax, shake it out, because I know this was boring. Have a good time, and we'll talk again soon.